The protagonist of this story suffered a traumatic accident that left her unable to see. However, a strange situation allowed him to distinguish things again. He was 33 years old when he first visited the psychiatric clinic of the German Dr. Bruno Waldvogel, accompanied by his guide dog, as he had been accustomed for more than 10 years. He had lost his vision altogether, specifically for 13 years, after suffering a traumatic accident that doctors do not want to give details. At that time she had been diagnosed with cortical blindness, caused, according to her medical report, by the brain damage caused during the incident. But the motives that led him to Dr. Waldvogel's clinic had nothing to do with his blindness. The protagonist of this story, which responds to the initials of BD, also suffered from dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality, a mental disorder that already suffered before the traumatic event. More than 10 different personalities. It presented more than 10 personalities, says the report issued by Dr. Waldvogel, an associate professor of medical psychology at the Institute of Physiological Medicine in Munich, IMP, Hans Strasberger, who also treated the patient. He changed his identity spontaneously. In each personality it took on a different name, age, gender, aptitude and temperament. The report, recently published in the journal Psych Journal, reads. The specialist says many people believe that those with physiological blindness pretend not to see, but this is not so because, in fact, there are mechanisms in the brain that prevent it. According to the doctors, the case of Beatty shows that in some cases, he even spoke different languages, sometimes only English, sometimes German, and sometimes mixed them up, explained there. According to the medical analysis, the patient had lived for some years, during her childhood, in an English-speaking country, so she knew the language. The most surprising thing was when, in the 4th session of consultation, embodying the identity of a teenage boy, he suddenly recovered his vision, Professor Strasberger tells BBC Mundo. The specialist says many people believe that those with physiological blindness pretend not to see, but this is not so because, in fact, there are mechanisms in the brain that prevent it. According to the doctors, the case of Beatty shows that the patient recognized some words in the title of a magazine. At first they were just letters, but then, very quickly, he began to visualize objects, until he came to recover the vision altogether. Doctors began using hypnotherapeutic techniques, and Beatty's visual ability spread to other identities or personality states, they say. Physiological blindness. It is incredible how this patient is able to change from one state to another, so that sometimes she sees and sometimes she does not. It is the first known case of these characteristics, says Strasberger. According to the specialist, none of his colleagues had heard of a similar case. And Waldvogel and Strasberger concluded that the first diagnosis had been wrong. Beatty blindness was not cortical, because it was not due to head injury following the accident. It was a physiological blindness, a psychogenic disturbance of vision, as Sigmund Freud described it in 1910. It's not that weird, it happens sometimes and it's a concept that's been known for many years, said Strasberger. What has never been given so far is that a person can be blind and see at the same time, depending on the personality that he adopts, he said. According to the doctor, the patient is no longer in therapy and her current situation is that of a blind person who, at times, can see. One of the most interesting conclusions, according to Strasberger, is the implications of the brain's ability to control the flow of visual information. People with brain damage blindness hardly regain vision and, if they do, it costs them many years, he said. The fact that Beatty suddenly recovers from sight is very revealing. The brain, that great unknown. In order to identify the patient's brain activity, doctors placed electrodes on the back of her head to measure the response of the central nervous system to sensory stimuli, which is known as the potential evoked VEP, for its acronym in English. Normally, the information travels from the eye to the thalamus in the center of the brain and then to the back, to the visual cortex. But psychiatrists discovered, thanks to this technique, that information was blocked in the brain of Beatty, and did not reach its final destination. This case shows how the brain is able to block information, and also reveals that there is a biological basis in schizogenic visual and multiple personality disorders, says Strasburger. The specialist says many people believe that those with physiological blindness pretend not to see, but this is not so because, in fact, there are mechanisms in the brain that prevent it. According to the doctors, the case of Beatty shows that the differences between personality states vary according to sensory information and have biological foundations. Right now you and I are having a conversation. You have your personality and I have mine. But these are, in some way, invented. They are generated somewhere in our brain, says Strasburger.